Hello, and welcome to Americans Talk Australian Survivor. I'm Rachel.
And I'm Matt. Unfortunately, Leah isn't able to join us for this episode, but let's jump right in.
So we just watched episode 8 of Australian Survivor Titans vs. Rebels, and there will be spoilers ahead. So we jump in on day 17 on the Titans tribe, and we see that there is some pirate partying going on with Ferris, Scott, and Raymond. They seem to be having a great time.
Right, making the eye patch out of a seashell and a piece of rope or a piece of string, having a good time.
So it's fun to see a little bit about, what day-to-day life is like at camp. But there's still this underlying tension that we cannot trust Kirby, which is coming from Ferris.
Right, and then we also see a profile on Scott and how he's an art director and he's a painter. He paints. So that was interesting.
Yeah, it was really interesting to get to know a little bit more about Scott. He hasn't been too big of a player yet, so it'll be interesting to see if he's planning on making more of an appearance down the road, if he's kind of sitting in the back, or how he's going to play the game. But he seems like a pretty cool person to get to know.
Right. So I think sometimes there are these characters or people in the show that you really don't get to know until later on, and then they go further in the show, and then because sometimes you get introduced to people early on and then they end up going, so that you have some sort of connection overall throughout the episodes, not just with one episode. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I think it's actually a really good strategy to lay low at the beginning and then kind of around the merge really pick up pace and make some big moves. So we'll see if that's what Scott's up to.
Right. You find an idol early on and you start telling everybody you found an idol, and then people are kind of like, ooh, a little standoffish.
Yeah, you don't want to be perceived as a threat too early on.
Right.
Yeah, so it's great to see Scott, and we'll be following him to see how he does in the coming episodes. And on the Titans tribe, on day 17, we're seeing that Valeria was saying she's looking into the cracks because there's 7 original rebels and 3 original Titans on this new Titans tribe after last night's tribe swap. So she was saying she thought that she'd have to kind of seduce someone and kind of be a little bit flirty to get a crack. But Ferris and Kirby are both just walking up to her, offering an alliance.
Right, and she seems a little leery of Ferris, a little doubtful.
Yeah, it sounds like she doesn't quite get along with him quite as well as Kirby. She seems to have said she has a lot in common with Kirby, a lot of interests, and feels connected. But Ferris is pitching that Kirby has flipped in the past and Ferris never has. So
right, it's interesting. Yeah, so you never know who's going to end up teaming up together.
Yeah, so Valeria, Winna, and Charles are the only 3 original Titans on the new Titans tribe. So it'll be very interesting to watch. Seems like they're going to have the power in this Ferris versus Kirby fight.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So then we go over to the Rebels tribe, and it's interesting because we do a little flashback to the night before, and typically that's how the episode opens, so it was kind of weird timing. But we saw a flashback to last night where Mark is meeting up with the middle-aged mafia after he was left out of the Viola vote, and Caroline saying, let's all just stay strong, we want to work with you, and he's saying, well, you just left me out of the vote.
Right, so how can I trust you is basically what he's saying, but being the master negotiator that he is, he says, I'll work with you. Sure, I'll work with you going forward. But I'm not positive he is sincere.
Yeah, so the night of the vote out, I think Caroline does a really good job. She said, okay, you're frustrated, just sleep on it, think about it, which I think is the right move, to push him to instantaneously say he's back in the alliance isn't going to be helpful to anyone. So
right.
She says, let's talk about it tomorrow. And then the next day, Mark says, oh, yeah, okay, I think it would be better for all of us if we stay middle-aged mafia strong. And we'll see if that holds.
But not much longer. We see Mark talking to Alex, and he's saying, hey, we've got to stick together, right? I want to work with you, Alex. And then he says that weird thing at the end, Yucatan.
Yeah, I still don't know what that means. Alex said he didn't know what that meant.
Right.
We'll have to look that up. But something probably about unity or revenge. He was talking that he wants to get revenge on Viola.
Right. He did bring that up quite a few times in this episode.
Yeah. So then there's a discussion between Alex and Sarah and Rihanna about maybe getting out Kitty with Mark. So we're seeing kind of a lot of this preview into what's going to happen later tonight. Mm-hmm. So both on the Rebels and the Titans tribe. We're starting to see over in the Titans, Ferris versus Kirby, and on the Rebels, Mark versus Caroline.
And then we jumped to the immunity challenge. No
Yes.
reward challenge.
Yeah, it was really interesting. We were expecting a reward, and we just went right into immunity. It did seem like tonight was a shorter episode than we've seen in the past, so maybe something else was going on
Right.
on 10 play. But anyway, it was interesting because as the rebels walk in, we see that Viola, or the Titans get their first look and see that Viola has been voted out.
Right. And Valeria starts questioning everyone. Who do you think the mastermind was? And she's like asking people point blank.
Yeah, she's calling out people. Like, tell me who
That's
did it.
unusual. I mean, because, you're going to make some enemies doing that. I think you could think that, but saying that is brave.
Yeah, I guess she figured that everyone knew that the two Vs were very close, so she wants to know who to enact revenge on and who her enemies are. But yeah, definitely very vocal.
And the way it was edited, she didn't really get a good answer.
Yeah, both Alex and Kitty say, "Oh, I don't know who did it." No one's really given a name. No one's giving any hints as to what was happening on the Rebel tribe last night.
And then that kind of just passed, and we went right into the challenge, where the teams had these incredibly heavy carts that they had to move after moving logs. It was crazy the amount of wood that they had to use to complete the challenge.
Yeah, so they had to knock down a bunch of wooden logs, and then they had to move them all around, and there was a lot of strength involved. And then they had to get on a wheel and kind of like wheel in this giant cart
Over the logs, had to make a little bridge of logs, and that was a real problem.
And then when you get the logs or get the cart to the right position, then you build a puzzle out of the contents of the cart. So everything tied together in the end.
And Jaden was moving those logs like toothpicks.
Yeah,
Jonathan said.
it was very
I
impressive.
mean, it was crazy how he was just flinging them, by himself.
Yeah, the point where he had to get rid of the logs in the tunnel so everyone could run through. He did it like almost totally on his own. He just ran through. So it was very impressive.
He's a strong guy.
And he was doing the wheel and getting the cart. So Jaden did very well, except for when the cart got stuck on a log. So Eden and Mark were back kind of watching the cart be pulled up, and they're trying to rearrange the logs, see what they're doing. And we didn't really see, or at least I couldn't see what exactly the problem was. I guess a log was just misplaced.
Right. We really didn't have a close shot of the wheel being stuck because it didn't look any more stuck. Maybe it was stuck on the other side. Maybe there was, part of a former branch sticking out of a log that was holding the other side, and they didn't have a camera over there. But it was a little confusing as to why that got stuck. And then and the other times the cart seemed to roll pretty easily over. It was just right there. For some reason, it got stuck for a long time.
Yeah, so the Rebels had this huge advantage with Jaden tearing through the tunnel, and then they get stuck on this log, and it really slowed them down to the point where the Titans could, even though they were a bit slower at the beginning, they surpassed the Rebels and got to their puzzle first. But eventually, both tribes make it to the puzzle, and it's a really cool puzzle. It's very different than what we've seen in the past. There's no logo. It's just a bunch of differently shaped pieces in a gradient color that you have to fit together. So it looked like there may have been like multiple ways to fit the pieces together, but you had to get the gradient right.
Right. It sounds very difficult because I think they started working on the puzzles without paying attention to the gradient, but it was just a slight difference.
Yeah,
in the color of the blues of the tiles.
Yeah, so this is, and it was also complicated because they were really big pieces. It wasn't like a puzzle that you do on a table. It's like they were walking around with the puzzle pieces. Like it was a big puzzle.
Right. It took one or two people to move each piece of the puzzle. It was very physical activity.
And we saw Eileen over on the Titans tribe be the first to kind of point out the gradient, at least on camera, that let's pay attention to these colors a little bit. So that's impressive. I think that's the second puzzle that Eileen has been able to crack.
Right. She's very observant like that.
Yeah.
Able to catch that.
And then the Titans had a second ace up their sleeve with Scott, the art director.
Yes. And Jonathan calls him out.
Yeah. Who would have guessed that being an art director could have such an effect on a puzzle in Survivor? But when you're working with gradients and shapes, it definitely can.
And we see why they had that profile at the beginning of the episode.
Yeah.
Explaining that Mark was an art director
or Scott.
Scott, excuse me, yes.
So the Titans take the win thanks to art director Scott. And that means they are safe from tonight's tribal council, and we are sending the rebels back to tribal council tonight. So we see a little soundbite before we go to commercial where Mark says that he is ready to be a rebel pirate and he is getting revenge with a capital R.
Right. He wants Kitty out. That's his goal, to get Kitty.
Yes, he wants revenge for Viola, and he's targeting Caroline and Kitty as a duo.
Right.
So we get back to camp, and at the water well, we see the middle-aged mafia meeting, and they're talking about who to get out. Eden says that Rihanna is offering more at challenges than Sarah, so he'd prefer to keep Rihanna and vote out Sarah.
And Mark suggests splitting the vote.
Yeah, which is key to Mark's plan, that will come up on, because there's not really any talk that Sarah or Rihanna have an idol, but he just kind of throws it out there, and everyone's like, oh yeah, that's a good idea, why not? So they say, well, how do we split the vote? And they decide, well, we'll bring in Alex, and if we have Alex, along with the 4 from the middle-aged mafia, and then Jaden, that'll be 6 people voting, and they'll do a 3-3 split. Whoever Rihanna and Sarah vote for, they'll only have 2.
Well, they throw Mark's name out.
Mark actually volunteered himself.
Right. For Rihanna and Sarah to vote, so they'll tell them, vote Mark.
Yeah, so that's interesting that he's so confident in his plan, he's willing to put his name out there. And
I agree, because it doesn't seem like he has that strong of a foothold with this group.
Yes.
To throw his name out like that.
Since he was kind of on the chopping block last night.
Mm-hmm.
They took out Viola, but it was because of him.
Right.
So we see that they've decided to bring in Alex, which it seems like they are seeing Alex as a main member of their core alliance now.
It does. He doesn't seem like an outsider at all.
Which is unique that they chose Alex over Sarah or Rihanna. Why do you think that was?
I think maybe because Sarah and Rihanna are friends or almost sisters. They seem to be so close together, so tight, that Alex kind of is floating out there, and maybe he's more, they can bend him more than the two of them working together.
Yeah, that makes sense. They do seem to have a closer alliance, and Alex seems to be on the outside of that trio.
Right. So if we have to get all 3 of them eventually, why don't we just be friends with one of them? And the other 2 already seem to be pretty good friends. So why don't we just bring Alex in, and then eventually we'll get him?
Makes sense. And Alex is stronger out of the 3.
Right.
So he's more helpful in challenges at this point. So they decide that Alex and Jaden will combine with the middle-aged mafia to make their 6. And then we see Mark kind of split off, and he decides that he has a different way that he's going to do this.
Right.
So he approaches Alex, Sarah, and Rihanna, and he says, let's get out Kitty. I think he said Kitty first, which was a surprise to me because he had been targeting Caroline for so long. It's been the last 2 votes we've brought up this idea of maybe getting out Caroline.
Right. Maybe he doesn't see Caroline as so much the leader that we do. Maybe he's not getting that.
Yeah, in the game, it's hard to see who's calling the shots.
Right. But we all know that Caroline is. And Kitty's kind of like the second in command, kind of. The vice president, sort of, right?
Yeah, of the group.
Right.
Yeah, and it's interesting because Kitty seems to be much more athletic than Caroline. Mm-hmm. And we saw in last night's episode that Caroline kind of fumbled the challenge a little bit. So it makes sense to keep Kitty over Caroline. And we'll see that come up later. But it's interesting that kind of first vocalized was Kitty going home.
Right. So Mark goes to Sarah, Riri, and Alex and says, okay, this is the plan. Here's the plan. You guys work with me, and we'll get rid of Kitty. And I have an idol.
Yeah. So, or I don't think that was...
He didn't say that soon?
Just yet. I think that was after everything started to explode.
I'm sorry. I'm jumping ahead. Sorry.
So much happened tonight. It's hard to keep track. So I think first Mark kind of gets this idea going. And then Sarah and Rihanna are together on the beach. And they say, so we have 2 options. We can vote Mark with the girls of Caroline and Kitty, and also Eden and Jaden as well. But they're kind of thinking that their alliance there would be Caroline, Kitty, Sarah, and Rihanna. Mm-hmm. Or they can vote with Mark and Alex and target Kitty or Caroline. And they think, well, we kind of get along better with the girls. And they don't quite realize at this point that Mark is the throwaway name. They think that Caroline and Kitty are actually writing down Mark's name, when in reality, Caroline and Kitty are targeting Sarah and Rihanna.
Right.
So kind of a little bit of deceit there.
So it kind of worked in Mark's advantage.
Yeah.
Because they're voting for me. You guys need to help.
Yeah, so maybe that's why he threw out his name.
That could be.
But yeah, very interesting that from the couch, we're all kind of yelling, no, Mark's not even a real vote. Like, you have to go with him. So then Sarah and Rihanna go straight to Kitty, and they're like, well, Mark just told us that we're targeting you. And that was kind of a surprise.
A strange move to just jump out and say that.
It didn't feel like it was very thought through. It felt like they were just saying, here's us drawing a line in the sand and saying that we're with Kitty. So then Kitty practically immediately runs back to the well, it looks like. And Mark is there, Eden's there, I think Caroline's there as well. And she says, oh, Mark, the girls just told me that you want to get me out, but I know they're just lying. And it was kind of...
Yes, like she just like didn't even think that Mark would be doing that.
Yeah, so I wish that we would have heard a little bit more from her in the soundbite to see, did she truly think that they were lying to her, or did she have any sneaking suspicion that Mark had something else going under the surface?
Right. And Sarah was there, right? Then Sarah walked up? Or was that a little bit, am I jumping ahead again?
It's so confusing to try
right,
to
there were so many conversations.
They were all
right?
so fast.
Right, and then everybody looked awkward, right?
Yeah.
Because everyone's calling each other a liar or just not saying anything. And it just seemed like a weird situation.
Yeah, but then this is the moment. So after Kitty kind of exposes Mark to the rest of the Alliance, but doesn't really call him out, that's when Mark runs back to the beach. And he finds Rihanna, Sarah, and Alex, and he says, okay, new plan. We're putting votes on Caroline, and I have an idol. So now Caroline is the target. And so I guess maybe we were confused. Was Kitty like really on the chopping block? Why did we switch to Caroline? It makes sense to go after Caroline for all the reasons we talked about before. But
well, maybe he's just changing the target.
Yeah.
Right? You know, keep the enemy on their toes.
Yeah.
Right? What if they had an idol? What if they had some plan? Right? So if they think they're coming for Kitty and then they switch it to Caroline, you know, right?
Yeah, change up the idol use.
Yep.
So another layer to this chaotic day at camp. Now Mark's switching the vote, and he's saying that he has an idol. So at this point, the only two people who knew that he had an idol prior were Viola, who just went home, and Valeria, who's on the opposite tribe. So at home, we were kind of like, oh my gosh, why did you tell anyone? That's our number one rule on this podcast is don't tell people when you have an idol.
Right, keep it to yourself.
So I guess maybe Mark was thinking, well, if I tell you that I have an idol and no votes for me count, why would you vote for me?
Why vote for me? Right. You might as well just vote with me and get the person out.
Yeah. So
that I want to vote out.
A lot's happening. Kind of weird that Mark just runs up and announces he has an idol, but he seems to be smart. He's a diplomat. He always has a plan. So maybe there's more to it that we weren't quite getting. Then we see the three original rebels have a little powwow where they discuss what we're going to do today. So Rihanna and Sarah are saying, well, you know, like, I don't know. We still really like Caroline and Kitty. And Alex says, listen, no one's voting for Mark tonight. That was a lie. They're targeting you. This was really brave of Alex to say because he's really like blowing up the game.
Right. And he could the target could easily turn to him.
Yeah, once people find out that he exposed the plan.
We've seen that happen plenty of times.
Especially since Alex is the outsider.
Right. He's the lowest man on their totem pole.
Yeah. And then we see Sarah walk away and she says, oh, I have to go talk to Eden. And then a little fight breaks out on the beach. Alex is saying, Sarah, you're going to blow up the game. Don't go talk to them. Don't say anything. And Sarah's saying, I'm not going to blow up the game. I'm just going to talk.
Right. And he's, practically begging her, please don't go. Don't go. Don't say anything.
Yeah, so we're really getting to see Sarah's gameplay in this episode, and I don't know if it's the recommended strategy that I would say.
It's sort of like just bouncing all over.
Yeah,
telling everybody everything she knows, and it doesn't have a good end. Like that plan doesn't have a logical. I don't know what the word I'm looking for is.
Yeah, a logical outcome. So. Yeah. Sarah has noted that she is always telling the truth and she just wants people to be honest with her, which is a nice way to come into the game, thinking that's what's going to happen. But I feel like Sarah's not grasping that people are lying to her. She seems to constantly be writing to people saying, well, I just heard this. Like, is that true? And she seems to be trying to make sense of how all of these opposing plans are all the truth. And she doesn't, from our perspective, seem to be grasping that, it's the game.
There's a game going on. Right, yes.
So an interesting strategy from Sarah. I think it shows a lot about her personality. She's a firefighter. She's one of the younger players. So I think that she just kind of went into it thinking everyone's going to be friends almost, and she wants to trust people.
Right. She trusts people. She trying to help people.
Yeah,
right?
Which is a great,
admirable.
Great qualities to have in person. In real life. Interesting.
But not in Survivor, right.
But I don't know, maybe there was more of a plan going into it than we're realizing, and maybe it just kind of, who knows with the editing.
Right. It's interesting we didn't hear anything from Jaden, I don't think.
Yeah.
Since the immunity challenge was over until we got to Tribal, I don't think we may have seen him once or twice, but he didn't say anything.
I think there was one time they said, okay, you're voting for Sarah Rihanna. And then he said, okay.
Right.
And that was it. There's all this happening on the beach. And we were counting the votes, trying to see what plan was going to work. And we kept forgetting that Jaden was even a vote. Yeah. He's just not in the episode.
Right.
So
Except when it came to throwing the sticks like toothpicks.
Yeah, well, he did a great job in the challenge, but strategy-wise, he's really under the radar.
Right.
It would be interesting to get to know Jaden a little bit more, because I feel like we rarely see sound bites from him, and he obviously is such a powerhouse in the challenges, but we don't know anything about him personally.
I wonder if he's at the merge, maybe this is his game plan.
Yeah.
Not do anything. Tell me what to do. I'll do it.
Yeah, maybe
I'll save the day. I'll lift everything heavy, and then when it comes to individual immunity, maybe he'll pull ahead and have a great game plan. Yeah.
So, he seems to be able to fit that stereotype of the, strength trainer who doesn't really understand what's happening socially in the game. So maybe it's an act. Who knows? But it'll definitely be interesting to see Jaden, play more of an individual game. I'm really excited to see him come out of the shell a little bit more and see a strategic side from him.
Right. Well, we did hear from Jaden when we jump ahead to Tribal.
Yeah, he says he had one conversation and he's good to go.
Right. They told me what to do, and I said, okay, sounds good. Let's eat.
Yeah. Everyone else is saying, oh, it was such a chaotic day. There's, everything's happening. So many conversations. I don't know what happened.
Bouncing all around. Everybody.
And Jaden's doing well. He's happy. So good for you, Jaden. That's awesome to just be so calm and collected during a busy episode like this.
Right,
so.
Which sounded like it was completely chaotic, right? Yeah. Just people running every which way and conversations. It was probably difficult for the crew following everybody around trying to keep up with every conversation.
Yeah, make sure you have footage of everyone talking. Seems crazy. So as we're talking at Tribal Council, we see Eden lean over to Caroline, and he says, I'm not confident about the split. Let's all vote for Sarah. So why do you think he said that?
I'm not sure. Was it something that Mark said? I'm not positive what exactly led to that.
Nothing really stood out to me as anything to trigger that things weren't going his way. I guess Rihanna was talking about how she has to go with her gut. And then Sarah was whispering to Alex, is she on board with us? So maybe just kind of the wishy-washiness of the rebels. He was thinking the original rebels. Maybe he was thinking that's going to be messed up. I don't know.
And well, when you watch the Tribal Council, sometimes I'm just thinking, oh, don't say anything. And you think that people aren't going to say something, and then they do. They give away too much, or they just say something that kind of is interpreted by everybody else as I'm not really going with what I told everybody I'm going to do. I'm going to go with my gut.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, no, we don't want you to vote with your gut. We told you where to vote or whatever, right? So that's what I think people sometimes say too much. And I imagine the Tribal Council goes on for a long time and we just see bits and pieces of it. But I think that people probably say too much.
Yeah.
Except Jaden.
Yeah. He's got the right idea with the tight lip. But so an interesting strategy from Eden. So he cancels the split vote. Everyone's whispering. And it turns out that everyone's putting their votes on Sarah.
Right. And Mark's looking around and sees them talking, but it doesn't appear that they say anything to Mark.
No. So we're counting at home, and it looks like if Jaden, Caroline, Kitty, and Eden all vote for Sarah, and then the original Rebels and Mark all vote for Caroline, we're going to come up with a tie.
Mm-hmm.
So we're getting excited as we go into the vote and we see everyone go back, write down their vote, and it's time to play an idol. And Mark says that he will play an idol for himself. Do you think this was a good idea?
Well, I thought that when we were watching the previous episode, I was thinking he should have played it because I thought that there might be a chance that he was going home. And when we watched this episode, I thought there was a good chance that he might be going home. Caroline and Kitty do not like him.
Yeah.
That's the vibe I'm getting. The sooner he's gone, the happier they'll be because they'll be more in charge and there won't be such a division. So I think why not play it? It doesn't appear that anybody else is really playing the idol game, like running around looking for them, right? There's no talk of anybody going. So if he plays it, he knows the next day when they wake up, almost always it's already hidden, right?
Well, he can find it.
He can find it probably without, sometimes it takes a lot of effort, but it seems like he could probably do it, right? He could probably do it.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was a good choice to play it, even though we knew that he wasn't the target of this vote. I think from his perspective, seeing the whispers at Tribal and knowing that his name was brought up, even though it was by him, and not feeling confident in his plan, I think it was smart to play his idol, even though he didn't really need it.
Right.
So we saw one vote go to Mark, and it did not count. And then
nobody wants to go home with an idol in their pocket, right?
So it was a smart move. So Mark had one vote. There were then 3 votes for Caroline and 4 votes for Sarah, sending her home.
Right.
So it would have been interesting to see what would have happened in a tie. It looks like Rihanna was the flipper. She
voted for Mark.
Yeah, and we saw in her soundbite, she said that she was just kind of getting worried that he was a big player, strong threat, and she had to go with her gut, as she was saying.
Right.
So I think that it was probably a smart move for Rihanna's personal game that she had to, try and fight against these bigger threats. It makes sense why she voted for Mark, but unfortunately, she basically sent home Sarah with that vote.
She did. Right. So it's too bad. It's her friend. And I guess if Kitty and Caroline can't get Mark out, at least they split up the 2 women who were friends.
Yeah.
Weren't necessarily with them, right? So they still succeeded.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was another great episode. Lots of strategy, lots of discussions. Really interesting episode.
A different challenge that we haven't seen before.
Yeah. It's a great episode. And before we end, I wanted to thank everyone who wrote in. Raymond from the show was reposting our Instagram poll and chatting with us a little bit over on Instagram at ATA Survivor. Thank you to everyone else who wrote in on the poll. And thank you to Joe, our emailer, who taught us a little bit more about Australian Survivor. We learned that Viola is on the show Doghouse. If anyone's watched, write in. Should we give it a watch? And we heard a little bit more about Kirby. So it turns out she's the Australian Football League women's coach, which is pretty cool. We didn't realize that she coached such a national league.
Right.
So that's really awesome. So congrats, Kirby. We're excited to see her play tomorrow night. So thank you to everyone who's been reaching out and connecting with us on socials. You can follow us on Instagram at ATA Survivor, TikTok at ATA Survivor, and send us an email at ataustraliansurvivor@gmail.com or call us at 475-4podcast. Thanks, and we'll see you tomorrow.